Hey everyone, I'm Alex. 9 years ago my parents, both respected doctors, threw me out of the house, told the entire extended family and their colleagues I was dead to them, and erased me from every photo, every conversation, every holiday. I survived. I built a life. Then I walked into my little sister's wedding uninvited. What my mother said to me in that moment still sits in my chest like a stone. If this story hits you the way it still hits me, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It really helps these long stories reach more people who need them. Now settle in. This is going to be a long one. I was 22 the night they decided I no longer existed. It was a Thursday in late October. Rain hammered the windows of the big brick house in the suburbs where my parents had raised us on a diet of perfect grades, perfect manners, and perfect silence about anything that didn't fit the image. My father was chief of surgery at the university hospital. My mother ran the pediatric wing like a general. My younger sister, Emma, was 17 and already talking about following them into medicine. I was the older one, the one who had quietly switched from pre-med to creative writing 2 years earlier and never told them until the loan statements started arriving. That night I came home from the campus library with a half-finished short story in my bag and a letter from the university confirming my scholarship for the next semester. I thought maybe, just maybe, they would finally listen. They were waiting in the living room. My father stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed. My mother sat on the edge of the white sofa, spine straight, hands folded in her lap the way she did when she was about to deliver bad news to a patient's family. Emma was nowhere in sight. The house smelled like the lemon polish the housekeeper used every Wednesday. "Sit down," my father said. I sat. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "We received a call from the financial aid office. They wanted to confirm your major change, creative writing." He said the words like they were a diagnosis. "You have been lying to us for 2 years." I tried to explain. The words came out thin and useless. I talked about how the science classes made me feel like I was drowning, how the stories I wrote at 3 in the morning felt like the only time I could breathe, how I still planned to finish my degree and find a way to support myself. None of it mattered. My mother spoke next. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, the same tone she used when she told parents their child would never walk again. "We did not raise you to throw away everything we built. We did not work 70-hour weeks so you could sit in coffee shops and pretend words matter more than healing people. You have embarrassed this family. You have embarrassed us in front of the hospital board, in front of our colleagues, in front of everyone who has ever respected the Reed name." I remember the exact moment the air left the room. My father walked to the side table, opened the drawer, and took out a thick manila envelope. He set it on the coffee table between us. "Your things will be packed by morning. There is a check inside for 3 months of rent and the balance of your tuition for this semester. After that, you are on your own. You will not contact us. You will not contact Emma. You will not use our name for references, for loans, for anything. As far as this family is concerned, Alexander Reed died tonight." I laughed. It came out broken. "You're joking?" My mother stood. She walked over, picked up the envelope, and pressed it into my hands. Her fingers were cold. "We are not. Pack what you can carry. The rest will be donated. Do not come back. Do not call. If you appear at any family event, any hospital function, any place where our name is known, we will have security remove you. You are dead to us, do you understand?" I looked at her face and saw nothing. No anger, no tears, just the same steady expression she wore when she told a room full of interns that a patient had coded and there was nothing more to be done. I left that night with 2 suitcases, the envelope, and the clothes on my back. I slept in my car behind the library until the scholarship office opened the next morning and helped me find emergency housing. For the first 6 months, I kept waiting for a call, a text, even a letter saying they had changed their minds. Nothing came. When I finally worked up the courage to call the house, the number had been changed. When I tried Emma's phone, it went straight to a message that said the number was no longer in service. I learned later that my parents had told everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins, the neighbors, the hospital staff, that I had overdosed and died. They held a small private memorial. They planted a tree in the backyard with a plaque that had my name and the year of my death. Emma was forbidden to speak of me. Anyone who asked was given the same quiet, tragic answer: Alexander is gone. I survived. I worked double shifts at a bookstore and a late-night diner. I finished my degree. I published a few short stories in small journals. I moved cities twice. I learned how to live without the people who were supposed to love me no matter what. 9 years passed. I was 31, living in a one-bedroom apartment 3 states away, working as a content editor for a mid-size publishing house when the invitation arrived. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to the Reed family at my old university mailbox that I still checked once a year out of habit. Inside was a thick cream card with gold lettering. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Emma Reed and Daniel Cho. Saturday the 14th of June, at the Riverside Conservatory. Reception to follow. There was no and guest. There was no note, just the invitation, as if the universe itself had decided I needed to see it. I sat on the floor of my apartment holding that card for a long time. Part of me wanted to burn it. Part of me wanted to show up in a suit and smile like nothing had ever happened. The larger part of me simply needed to see my sister's face one more time. I bought a plane ticket. I rented a black suit that almost fit. I told myself I would stand in the back, watch her walk down the aisle, and leave before anyone noticed. I did not expect my mother to see me. I did not expect what she would say, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That first night after they threw me out, I sat in my car with the rain coming down and the check still unopened in the envelope. I kept replaying my mother's voice. Asterisk, you are dead to us. I kept waiting for the grief to hit the way it does in movies, loud, dramatic, cleansing. Instead it arrived quiet and heavy, like wet cement settling into every hollow place inside me. I didn't cry that night. I just sat there until the sky started to lighten and the library lights came on, and then I walked inside and asked the night security guard if I could use the bathroom to wash my face. He looked at me like he already knew the story. He handed me a paper towel and said, "Whatever it is, kid, it won't kill you unless you let it." I didn't believe him then. 9 years later, standing in the back of a glass conservatory while my sister married a man I had never met, I would remember those words and wonder if the security guard had been wrong after all. Because what my mother said to me that day almost did. The morning of the wedding, the sky was the exact shade of blue that makes people say things like, "perfect day for a wedding." I hated it. I had flown in the night before and checked into a cheap motel 20 minutes from the conservatory. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't post on social media. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face the night she declared me dead calm, certain, already finished with me. At 10 a.m., I put on the rented suit, straightened the tie in the cracked motel mirror, and drove. The Riverside Conservatory sat on a wide lawn that rolled down to a slow green river. White chairs were already arranged in neat rows under a canopy of glass and iron. Flower arches in pale pink and cream framed the aisle. A string quartet was tuning up near the entrance. Guests in summer dresses and light suits moved across the grass like they belonged there. I parked at the far end of the overflow lot and walked. My heart was doing something irregular and painful. I kept my head down, sunglasses on, and slipped in through a side path that led to the rear of the seating area. I found a spot in the very last row, behind a tall man in a navy blazer who blocked most of the view. Perfect. I saw my father first. He stood near the front with a group of older men I recognized from hospital fundraisers years ago. His hair was grayer. He looked thinner. He laughed at something one of them said, and the sound carried. It was the same laugh he used at dinner parties when someone told a joke about medical school. I had forgotten how much I used to want that laugh directed at me. Then I saw Emma. She was standing just inside the conservatory doors with two bridesmaids, adjusting the veil. She was 26 now. The last time I had seen her she was 17, all sharp elbows and braces and fierce loyalty that my parents had systematically dismantled. She looked like our mother in the face but softer around the eyes. The dress was simple, white lace, no train. She kept glancing toward the entrance as if she expected someone. I wondered if she still thought about me. The ceremony started at 11. I watched my sister walk down the aisle on our father's arm. I watched her take the hand of a tall Korean man with kind eyes and a nervous smile. I watched them exchange vows that were short and sincere. When the officiant pronounced them married, the guests stood and applauded. I stayed seated and clapped once, softly, into my own palms. I had planned to leave the moment the recessional music started. I almost made it. I was halfway down the side path toward the parking lot when a voice behind me said my name. Not loudly, just Alexander. I turned. My mother stood 10 feet away in a pale blue mother-of-the-bride dress, a small clutch in her hands, her hair perfectly styled. For one frozen second neither of us moved. The applause from the ceremony still drifted across the lawn. A photographer's flash went off somewhere behind her. She looked at me the way she used to look at charts, quick, assessing, already deciding what the data meant. Then she walked toward me. I expected anger. I expected her to call security. I expected the same cold finality from 9 years earlier. Instead, she stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same light floral she had worn since I was a child, and said the words that still wake me up at 3 in the morning. You should have stayed dead. That was all. No raised voice. No scene. Just those 4 words delivered in the same calm tone she had used the night she erased me. Then she turned and walked back toward the conservatory as if she had simply stepped outside for air. I stood there on the path with the sun on my face and the river moving slowly behind the trees and those 4 words repeating in my head like a heartbeat. Asterisk, you should have stayed dead. I don't remember walking to the car. I don't remember the drive back to the motel. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed with the rented jacket still on, staring at the ugly floral wallpaper, and realizing that 9 years of building a life had not prepared me for the possibility that my mother still wished I had actually died. I stayed in that motel room for 3 days. I called in sick to work. I didn't eat much. I kept replaying the moment, her face, the exact pitch of her voice, the way she had already turned away before the words finished leaving her mouth. On the 4th day, I drove to the airport and flew home. I told myself it was over. I had seen my sister get married. I had received the final confirmation that my parents meant every word they said 9 years earlier. There was nothing left to do but keep living. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper in my sister's handwriting. I saw you. I know Mom spoke to you. Please call me. I need to tell you what really happened after you left. There was a phone number at the bottom. I sat with that letter for an entire night before I dialed. When Emma answered, her voice was shaking. Alex, she said, they lied about everything, and I think you need to know the truth before it destroys what's left of this family. Emma's voice on the phone that night was the first real thing I had heard from my family in 9 years. She was crying before she even finished the first sentence. I sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the wall and let her talk. She told me that the memorial our parents held had been small and private, just immediate family, and a few hospital colleagues who already knew how to keep secrets. They had told everyone I overdosed on painkillers I supposedly stole from the house. They planted the tree. They put my old bedroom under lock and key for 2 years before finally converting it into a home office. Emma had been 17 and terrified. Every time she tried to ask about me, our mother would go silent and our father would remind her that we do not speak of the dead. She said the worst part wasn't the lie. The worst part was how completely they committed to it. They burned the photo albums, she whispered. All the ones with you in them. Mom went through every single album with scissors. She cut you out. She left the backgrounds and the other people and just removed you, like you were never there. I closed my eyes. I could picture it, my mother at the kitchen table with the good scissors, methodical, clinical, removing every trace. Emma kept going. She told me she had tried to find me once when she turned 18. She had gone through old emails and found the address of a friend I used to crash with. By then, I had already moved cities. The friend had no idea where I was. Emma said she stopped looking after that because our father found out and threatened to pull her college funding if she ever contacted me again. I hated them for a long time, she said, but I also needed them. Med school is expensive. I told myself I'd find you after I graduated, after I was independent. Then life kept happening. Daniel proposed. The wedding planning started. And then, you were just there, at the back, in that black suit. I almost forgot how to breathe. I asked her what our mother had said to her after the ceremony. Emma was quiet for a long moment. She told me you had no right to be there. She told me if I spoke to you, she would never forgive me. Then she went back to the reception and smiled for every photograph like nothing had happened. We talked until almost 3 a.m. By the end of the call, I knew 2 things. First, my sister still loved me. Second, the story our parents had told the world was only the surface. There was something underneath it, something Emma was still too scared to say out loud. "There's more," she said right before we hung up. "But I can't tell you over the phone. Can you come back? Just for a weekend? Daniel and I have a place. Mom and Dad don't know the address." I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. 3 weeks later, I was on another plane. Emma and Daniel lived in a small brick house on the edge of the city, 20 minutes from the hospital where both of them now worked, Emma as a second-year resident, Daniel as a surgical fellow. The house smelled like coffee and new paint. There were still unpacked boxes in the hallway from the wedding gifts. Emma hugged me at the door and didn't let go for a long time. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were red. "You look the same," she said. "Older, but the same." Daniel shook my hand like he already considered me family. He made dinner simple pasta and salad, and then quietly excused himself to the back porch so Emma and I could talk. We sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light too bright and the night pressing against the windows. Emma took a breath. "The overdose story wasn't random," she said. "Mom and Dad didn't just invent it. They used it because of what happened the summer before you left." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She looked down at her hands. "You remember the summer after your sophomore year, when you came home and you were different, quiet, sleeping all day, barely eating?" I remembered. I had been depressed. The pre-med track was crushing me. I had started writing at night just to feel like I still existed. I hadn't told anyone how bad it got. Emma's voice dropped. "Mom found the pills in your desk drawer, the ones you got from the campus health center. She didn't say anything to you. She went straight to Dad. They had a whole conversation about whether you were a danger to the family's reputation. Dad wanted to put you on a leave of absence and send you to some private facility. Mom said that would look worse, people would talk, so they decided to wait and see." My stomach turned. They knew you were struggling, and instead of helping you, they started planning how to erase you if it ever became public. When you finally told them about the major change, it wasn't just about the writing. It was the last piece of evidence they needed that you were never going to be the son they wanted. So they activated the plan they had already written in their heads. I sat there feeling like the floor had tilted. All those years I had believed the rejection started the night they handed me the envelope. Now I understood it had started much earlier while I was still living under their roof, still trying to be what they needed, still thinking the silence in the house was normal. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "There's one more thing," she said, "and it's the reason I asked you to come." She stood, walked to a drawer in the living room, and came back with a small metal box. Inside were photographs, ones our mother had missed when she went through the albums with scissors. Pictures of me as a kid, of the 2 of us on the beach, of family dinners where I was still smiling. And underneath the photos was a folded piece of paper. Emma unfolded it carefully. It was a letter in our mother's handwriting, dated 3 months after they threw me out. I read the first line and the room went quiet. Asterisk to whom it may concern. This letter is to confirm that Alexander Reed is no longer a member of this family and should be considered deceased for all legal and social purposes. The letter went on for 2 pages. It was formal. It was detailed. It instructed the recipient to remove my name from every document, every insurance policy, every mention in the hospital's family records. It ended with our mother's signature and our father's beneath it. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. I found this in Dad's study last year when I was looking for my birth certificate. They sent copies of this letter to the university, to the hospital administration, to our relatives. That's why no one ever reached out. They didn't just tell people you were dead. They made it official on paper. I stared at the letter until the words blurred. 9 years of silence suddenly made a different kind of sense. It wasn't only cruelty. It was policy. I stayed at Emma and Daniel's house for 4 days. Those days felt like living in a parallel version of the life I was supposed to have had. We cooked breakfast together. We sat on the back porch in the evenings while Daniel told terrible surgeon jokes and Emma rolled her eyes. We went through the photographs one by one and I told her the stories behind the ones she was too young to remember. For the first time in almost a decade, I felt like someone's brother again. But the letter stayed on the kitchen table like a third presence. On the 3rd night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emma and I sat with glasses of wine and the city lights blinking in the distance. I need to confront them, I said. Emma shook her head immediately. No, Alex, you don't understand what they're like now. After the wedding, Mom has been worse. She's been calling the hospital legal department. She's been talking about restraining orders. Dad won't even say your name. If you show up again, they'll escalate. They already declared me dead on paper. How much further can they escalate? She didn't answer. I spent the next day walking the neighborhood, trying to decide what justice even looked like in a situation like this. Money, an apology, a public correction of the lie, none of it felt like enough. The damage was already done. 9 years of being erased, of building a life on the foundation of their rejection, of carrying the weight of a mother who looked me in the eye and said I should have stayed dead. That evening, I made a decision. I called the hospital where my parents still worked and asked for the Office of Medical Affairs. I used my full name. I explained, calmly, that I was the son of Dr. Margaret Reed and Dr. Thomas Reed, that I had been falsely reported as deceased, and that I wanted the record corrected. The woman on the other end went very quiet. Mr. Reed, she said carefully, I'm going to transfer you to legal. Please hold. 20 minutes later, a different voice came on the line, a man who introduced himself as counsel for the hospital. He was polite. He was also clearly reading from a file. Mr. Reed, we have documentation on record stating that you are deceased. That documentation was provided by your parents and supported by a death notification filed with the university 9 years ago. If you are claiming this is inaccurate, we will need proof of identity, a living status affidavit, and quite possibly a court order before we can amend any internal records. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat on Emma's back steps and laughed until it turned into something closer to crying. They had done it thoroughly. They had not simply told a story. They had built a paper trail solid enough that even the institution where they worked treated me as a ghost. Emma found me out there an hour later. She sat down beside me without speaking. I'm going to sue them, I said eventually. She didn't argue. She just nodded once, slowly, like she had already known this was coming. The next morning, I flew home and started making calls. I found a lawyer who specialized in family defamation and false death reports. Yes, that is apparently a real niche. Her name was Priya Shah. She listened to the entire story without interrupting, then leaned back in her chair and said, "This is one of the most complete erasures I've ever seen. Your parents didn't just reject you. They performed a kind of social murder and then filed the paperwork to make it stick." She agreed to take the case on contingency. The first step was gathering every piece of evidence that proved I was alive and had been systematically cut off. Bank records, employment history, tax returns, the original university transcript that still listed me as a creative writing major, the letter Emma had found, screenshots of the memorial tree plaque that still stood in my parents' backyard according to a recent real estate listing photo. It took 3 months. During those 3 months, I barely slept. I went to work, I came home, I organized documents until 2 in the morning. Emma sent me updates in careful, coded texts. Our parents had no idea the storm was gathering. Then Priya filed. The lawsuit named both of my parents and requested 3 things: a formal public retraction of the death claim, correction of all institutional records, and damages for the emotional and professional harm caused by 9 years of enforced erasure. The day the papers were served, Emma called me shaking. "Mom, open the door," she said. The process server handed her the envelope. She looked at the first page, closed the door, and didn't say a word. Dad got home an hour later. I wasn't there, but Daniel's attending was in the hallway when Dad found out. He said Dad went completely white and then walked into an empty conference room and stayed there for 40 minutes. I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt the absence of the satisfaction I had expected. 2 weeks later, we received their response through their attorney. They did not deny the facts. They claimed that at the time of the disownment, they had believed, in good faith, that I was a danger to myself and to the family's stability, and that the death narrative had been a protective measure to prevent further scandal. They offered a private settlement, a sum of money, a sealed agreement, and a quiet correction of the hospital and university records on the condition that I never contact them again and never speak publicly about what they had done. Priya looked at me across her desk. "It's a strong opening offer," she said, "but it's also an admission. They're not fighting the truth. They're trying to buy your silence." I thought about my mother's voice on the path outside the conservatory. Asterisk, "You should have stayed dead." I told Priya we were going to trial. The discovery phase lasted almost a year. Both sides exchanged documents. Depositions were scheduled. I sat in a conference room for 6 hours while my parents' lawyer asked me questions designed to make me look unstable, ungrateful, and opportunistic. I answered every one of them with the same flat honesty I had used the night they threw me out. When it was my parents' turn, I was not allowed in the room, but Priya's summaries were enough. My father claimed he had acted out of concern for Emma's future and the family's professional standing. My mother claimed she had genuinely believed I was on a path towards self-destruction and that the death story had been the cleanest way to protect everyone involved. Neither of them apologized. Neither of them expressed regret for the years I had spent thinking I was completely alone. Emma was deposed as well. She told the truth. She cried on the record. She said she had been complicit through silence and that she would spend the rest of her life trying to make it right. Daniel sat beside her the entire time. The trial itself was scheduled for a gray Tuesday in March. I flew in 3 days early and stayed with Emma and Daniel again. The night before court, the 3 of us sat at the same kitchen table where Emma had first shown me the letter. "You don't have to do this," Emma said quietly. "You could still take the settlement, walk away with the money and the corrected records and never see them again." I shook my head. They told the world I was dead. They told *me* I should have stayed dead. I need them to say, in a room with a judge and a record, that they were wrong. She nodded. She understood. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No jury, just a bench trial in front of a judge who had a reputation for being exacting and unsentimental. My parents sat at the defense table with their attorney. They did not look at me when I entered. My mother wore a dark suit. My father looked older than he had at the wedding. Priya presented the evidence methodically: the letter, the institutional records, the memorial tree, the years of silence, the moment at the wedding. She called Emma. She called a former university administrator who confirmed that a death notification had been received and acted upon. She called me. I told the story from the beginning. The night with the envelope. The years of building a life without a family. The invitation that arrived like a ghost. The 4 words on the path outside the conservatory. When I finished, the courtroom was very quiet. My parents' attorney tried to paint the entire situation as a tragic misunderstanding between a high-achieving family and a son who had chosen a different path. He suggested that my lawsuit was motivated by resentment and a desire for financial gain. He asked the judge to consider the emotional toll on my parents of having a child who, in their view, had rejected everything they stood for. The judge listened without expression. Closing arguments lasted less than an hour. Then we waited. The decision came 2 weeks later. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. She ordered a formal public retraction to be published in the local paper and circulated to every institution that had received the original death notification. She ordered the correction of all records. She awarded damages that were larger than the settlement offer had been. And in the final paragraph of her written opinion, she included a sentence that Priya later told me was unusual for a civil ruling. The court finds that the defendant's actions constituted a deliberate and sustained campaign to erase the plaintiff from familial and social existence, and that such conduct, while not criminal, represents a profound violation of the basic human need to be recognized as living. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I called Emma and we both cried. The retraction was published on a Thursday. It was a short, formal statement. My parents' names appeared at the bottom. It said that Alexander Reed was alive, that the previous reports of his death had been inaccurate, and that the family regretted any confusion caused. It did not apologize. It did not explain. But it existed, in black and white, in a newspaper that still reached the same circles my parents moved in. The hospital corrected its internal records within a week. The university followed. Relatives I had not heard from in a decade began sending cautious, awkward messages. Some apologized. Some asked questions I did not answer. A few simply said they were glad I was alive. My parents never contacted me. I didn't expect them to. I used part of the damages to pay off the last of my student loans. I used another part to take a 3-month leave from work and travel nothing dramatic, just long stretches of quiet in places where no one knew my name. When I came back, I felt lighter in a way I hadn't since I was 22. Emma and Daniel had a daughter the following spring. They named her after our grandmother on our mother's side, the only person in the family who had ever quietly disagreed with what my parents did. They asked me to be the godfather. I said yes. I still think about the wedding sometimes. I still hear my mother's voice on that path. Asterisk, you should have stayed dead. The difference is that the words no longer feel like a verdict. They feel like evidence. Evidence of how far some people will go to protect an image. Evidence of how thoroughly love can be withdrawn when it becomes inconvenient. Evidence that I survived something designed to erase me. I do not forgive them. I also do not spend my days waiting for them to become different people. Some endings are not reconciliations. Some endings are simply the truth finally written down where everyone can see it. 5 years after the trial, I published a book. It was not a memoir, exactly. It was a novel about a man who is declared dead by his own family and has to learn how to live as a ghost who refuses to disappear. The details were changed. The names were different, but anyone who had followed the case would recognize the shape of the story. The book did better than I expected. It found readers who had been cut off by their own families, readers who had been told they were too much or not enough, readers who understood what it meant to be erased while still breathing. I did a small book tour. At every stop, someone would wait until the signing line thinned and then tell me their version of the same wound. I never mentioned my parents by name. I didn't need to. Emma came to the reading in our hometown. She sat in the back row with Daniel and their daughter, who was old enough by then to color quietly in a notebook. Afterward, she hugged me and said, "I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to stand next to you." I told her she had nothing left to apologize for. Our parents did not attend. I heard through the usual quiet channels that my mother had retired early from the hospital and that my father had reduced his surgical schedule. I heard that the memorial tree in the backyard had been quietly removed the same month the retraction was published. I did not verify any of it. I no longer needed to. Life continued. I met someone. Her name was Jordan. She was a librarian with a dry sense of humor and a complete lack of interest in other people's family dramas. When I eventually told her the whole story late one night on a balcony overlooking a city that was not the one I grew up in, she listened without interrupting, and then said, "So your mother told you to stay dead, and instead you wrote a book about refusing." That tracks. We got married on a beach 2 years later. Emma was my best person. Daniel held their daughter on his shoulders so she could see. No one from my parents' side was invited. No one from their side asked to be. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my tie and realized I was not waiting for a last-minute objection, a letter, a phone call. The absence had become ordinary. The wound had scarred over into something I could carry without it defining every step. That night, after the small reception, Emma pulled me aside. "Mom called me last week," she said. I waited. "She asked if you were happy. That was all. Just, is he happy?" I told her yes. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said good and hung up. I didn't know what to do with that information. I still don't. Perhaps it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement she was capable of offering. Perhaps it was nothing. I decided it didn't matter. I had already built the life they tried to prevent. 10 years after I walked into my sister's wedding, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small wooden box and a note in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. "Alexander, I am dying. The doctors give me months. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking for a visit. I am only returning what was never mine to keep. Margaret." Inside the box were the photographs she had cut me out of all those years ago, the original prints. Carefully preserved, the scissor lines still visible around the empty spaces where my face and body had been. There were also a few I had never seen. Pictures of me as a toddler on my father's shoulders, of the 4 of us at a lake house the summer before everything began to fracture, of me at 16 holding a trophy from a debate tournament I had completely forgotten. At the bottom of the box was the original manila envelope from the night they threw me out. The check inside had never been cashed. It was still there, yellowed and meaningless. I sat with the box for a long time. I did not go to see her. I did not write back. I took the photographs to a restorer and had the missing pieces filled in as best as technology allowed, my face reconstructed from other images. My body returned to the spaces she had cut away. When the work was finished, I framed 3 of them and hung them in the hallway of the house Jordan and I had bought. Emma came over the day they went up. She stood in front of the frames for a long time without speaking. "She kept them," she said finally. "All these years she kept the pieces she cut out." "I know. Does that change anything?" I thought about it. "No," I said, "but it makes the story complete." My mother died 3 months later. The obituary in the paper listed her surviving family as her husband, her daughter, her son-in-law, and her granddaughter. My name was not included. I had not expected it to be. I did not attend the funeral. Emma went. She told me afterward that our father had looked smaller than she remembered, and that he had not spoken to her about me at all. Life, again, continued. I am 43 now. Jordan and I have a son. We named him Elias, after no one in particular, just a name we both liked. He is 5, loud, obsessed with dinosaurs, and completely uninterested in the complicated history of the adults around him. When he asks about grandparents, I tell him the truth in the simplest language I can manage. Some families stay together and some families break, and we are the kind that built something new. Emma and Daniel's daughter is old enough to ask harder questions. Last summer, during a visit, she sat at our kitchen table and said, "Mom told me you were dead once. But you're not. So was Grandma lying?" Emma looked at me. I looked at Emma. Then I sat down and told the child a version of the story that left out the cruelest details but kept the spine intact. That sometimes people who are supposed to love you decide they can't, and when that happens, the people who remain have to decide whether to keep loving each other anyway. She listened the way children do completely, without flinching, and then nodded and asked if she could have more ice cream. I think that is the closest thing to healing the next generation gets. The book has been translated into 6 languages. Occasionally, I still get letters from readers who say the story helped them leave a family that was killing them in slower ways. I answer everyone. I never tell them what to do. I only tell them that survival is possible, and that survival can eventually look like a quiet, ordinary life filled with people who chose you. I do not dream about the wedding anymore. Sometimes, though, in the early morning before anyone else is awake, I still hear the exact cadence of my mother's voice on that path. You should have stayed dead. I get out of bed. I make coffee. I watch the light come into the kitchen. I check on my sleeping son. I kiss Jordan's shoulder. I feed the dog. I begin the day the same way I have begun every day since the trial ended, by being stubbornly, ordinary, irrevocably alive. If you have read this far, thank you. I did not write this story because I wanted pity. I wrote it because the alternative was letting the official version stand the version in which I died at 22 and stayed dead. My parents tried to erase me with a story. I answered with a longer one. That is all any of us can do when the people who were supposed to protect us choose instead to bury us while we are still breathing. We keep living. We keep speaking. We build the family that remains. We refuse the grave they dug for us. 9 years after they declared me dead, I walked into my sister's wedding. My mother looked at me and told me I should have stayed dead. I did not. I am still here. And if you are reading this while carrying your own version of that same wound, if someone who was supposed to love you decided you were better as a ghost, then hear me. You are allowed to stay. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to write a different ending. Subscribe if these stories matter to you. Like the video if you made it to the end. Leave a comment and tell me what you're still surviving. I'll be here, still alive, still telling it.